Welcome, fellow Stardust. Are you ready for a scare? I see you've come back for more. If you're new here, buckle up, and thank you all for joining me today. My name is DeRay, aka Rainbow Fright, lover of all things dark, creepy, and weird. And today, I'll be discussing Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World from 1951, as well as John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. Both were adaptations of John W. Campbell's novella, Who Goes There, published in 1938. I'll be joined by another very special returning guest. If you're a fan of my channel, then you probably have seen him before. Please join me in welcoming back Anthony of Fever Dreamland Theater.
Hey, what's up? It is very, very good to see you here. It's a little chilly where I am. Hopefully it's not as bad where you are.
Welcome, welcome. I do not want to be where you are right now. Hell no. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. And I'm just so excited to chat up with you again about these science fiction movies. The last discussions that we had on my channel were a deep dive on Dr. Sleep and a comparison video between the others and the Babadook. But today, we are going to be talking about aliens.
More specifically, we're going to be talking about The Thing, or all of the things, really. We're going to get into a lot of good stuff here. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, DeRay. I'm very happy to be here again. It's always a pleasure.
Oh yes, I am so excited. Let's get into it.
We're going to try to figure out the shape of this thing. Here's the tool, sir.
So before we get into our thoughts on the original film, here is a brief synopsis, and beware Stardust, there will be spoilers for both films. The Thing from Another World follows a team of scientists and military personnel stationed in the Arctic who discover a crashed UFO buried in the ice. Upon investigation, they unearth an extraterrestrial being, frozen but alive. When they accidentally thaw it out, they realize they've awakened a hostile creature with a thirst for human blood. As the creature rampages through their isolated outpost, the team must band together before it kills them all. As I mentioned before, this is an adaptation of Who Goes There, but it is a loose adaptation as the thing in the novella is a shape-shifting creature with blue skin, 3 red eyes, a sucker for a mouth, and stringy hair, who is able to imitate any living thing. But in the film, we have a more Frankenstein-like creature. The decision for this type of monster instead was made due to budgetary limitations. The rights to make the film were bought by writers Charles Lederer and Ben Hecht, who purchased them from Campbell for $1,250. Howard Hawks was also given a writing credit in addition to his producing credit, under his production company name Winchester Pictures. The director, Chris Nyby, was a longtime editor for Hawks, and this would be his first of 7 films he directed. The film was distributed by RKO Pictures, one of the OGs. The film stars Margaret Sheridan, Kenneth Tobey, Robert Cornthwaite, Douglas Spencer, and James Arness, who was The Thing. With a budget of $40,000, $370,000 today, it earned $1.9 million at the box office. So Anthony, when did you first see the original and what were your initial thoughts?
Okay, so the original one is one of many movies I saw like a million years ago. I believe I was probably a little kid, and it didn't really resonate with me very much. So I was looking forward to this discussion because I was like, okay, good. Now I have a chance to rewatch it, as an adult, as a semi-adult, whatever I want to call myself. and it's exciting because I am a huge fan, as everybody knows, of the 80s one. But I hadn't really had a chance to revisit the original one. I almost feel like it's a fresh movie to me in many ways. And it was a pleasure to basically revisit it. And I almost feel like, you know what, a good solid viewing of that first one may have actually helped, and then moving on to the 80s one.
I actually think watching the 80s version first kind of helped me get into the mood of this one because I knew to expect something grand to come from what I was seeing in the beginning, which was just a whole lot of talking, which at first honestly kind of bugged me because I didn't really care for the overlapping dialogue, the fast talking, which was intentional to make it feel like it was natural. But for me, it was just hard to catch up with what they were saying because they all sounded alike. So I ended up having to rewind it. Some of it wasn't even that important, but just wanted to make sure, I was getting everything. But overall, I think the 50s version did a really good job with building suspense and tension. There wasn't any of the gore and special effects that we get in the 80s version that makes it so great. But I think this was still a good tension building story that just kept my attention throughout to the very end.
I think the best way for me to have viewed this movie is just, and I learned this pretty early on as I was watching it, I had to detach myself completely from the Carpenter version and just take this for what it is. It's a 50s monster movie, sci-fi thriller. And it's a product of its time. And overall, I actually did like it. I may have some crap talking here and there that you'll hear about. And I have some criticisms, but overall, I did like it. But I think the highlight of this film, at least for me, was the creature. I know that some people have been critical saying that it's essentially Frankenstein. I actually really liked it. I think that was the best part of it. And I actually liked that this was a unique version of the creature because he's plant-based. That was some interesting stuff. That was actually some of my favorite stuff. I would have liked a lot more of that. I would have liked a lot more of the creature. And yes. I have to give them credit because actually some of my favorite scenes in this movie, and maybe you may or may not feel the same way, are the very few segments that we get with the creature. It's just good stuff. It's classic, sci-fi horror monster stuff, and I love it. I loved all of that stuff. I'm a fan when it comes to some of the old 50s, 60s monster stuff. So I loved all of that. I thought that they nailed all of that. I just would have liked to have seen more of it. It's a slow burn, definitely, right? But the 80s one is a slow burn, and yet it plays so much better.
Yes, I did also like the creature. What I really liked about him was the science, the biology about him. Like you said, he was basically a vegetable, and I liked them talking about it and then seeing those plants that sprout up with the plasma and part of the creature. Unfortunately, we don't see him until an hour and 10 minutes into the film, and we only see him for a total of about 3 minutes. We don't get close-ups apparently because the close-ups they did get just showed all the flaws of the makeup, which I think would have been fine, especially for the 50s. They should have just left those in. I feel bad for the actor who's actually embarrassed to, be called the Thing because he was just ashamed of how it looked and how he was portrayed. But for us fans of the film, he did a great job for what he was given. And sure, I would have liked to see it more, but I think I just enjoyed more of what I learned about him and the biology of him.
James Arness, I believe that was the actor's name. Big guy, very tall, and he definitely had a presence, I would say. But yeah, again, to your point about the biology of the creature, we get some of the character work in this that I did like was the stuff with Scotty, played by Douglas Spencer. So he really wants to examine the creature. He wants to study the creature. He's a scientist, but yet there's this conflict between, no, let's just kill him. I liked all of that stuff. And again, even that, I wish we would have gotten a little more of those dynamics. This whole thing of like, we have to either capture the creature or we have to just kill the creature versus like, no, we need to study it for science, for mankind. That's all really good stuff to me. And I just wish we'd gotten a little bit more of that and a little less of just general sort of exposition and talking and planning and then talking more. There's a lot of that.
Yeah, I loved Dr. Carrington's point of view of if we all died, that's fine, as long as we can advance science a little bit further. I saw where he was coming from, and I liked seeing that power struggle between the military and him.
Yeah. You just triggered a thought. Science versus the military. In the beginning, when they first discover the craft, that's an excellent scene. It's definitely a product of its time because we have the early 50s and we have UFO sightings and all of this stuff going on. So it makes sense for this to make its way into sci-fi and this sort of sense of discovery and wonder about what's up there in space. It makes sense to see that in a movie. But again, going back to like science versus the military, what they learn is the ship in the ice, and they make this big circle. And we see that scene again, sort of reenacted in a later movie. But I love that scene. I love that scene of Discovery. But the decision is made to excavate the craft, but they use thermite to do this. So of course it explodes, and the ship is just apparently blown to smithereens. So there goes all of that. So much for Discovery. But the thing is, then they spot the creature under the ice. We don't see the creature. There's a lot of telling and not showing in this movie. So they spot the creature, but we don't cut away and show it under the ice. We just know that they see the creature under there. And then what do they say? How are we going to get it out? Thermite. It's like, stop with the thermite, guys.
Yeah, come on.
Thermite isn't the answer to everything. But now we know the creature was like a monster anyway. So maybe thermite would have been the way to go, considering how things work out. But yeah. So but again, I think that whole scene, it sort of fits thematically with this whole idea of science versus the military. And I just thought of another thing. Close the door. Close the door.
Come in. Close the door.
Shut that door. There's a goddamn blizzard out there.
Close the door. Come in. Close the door.
It ain't two pieces of wood. One ain't good enough. 2 pieces of wood. The fucking thing is busted.
That scene grabbed me because, like I said, I hadn't seen this movie in a million years. So when I watched it again and I saw that bit, I instantly thought of Tarantino. Obviously, The Hateful Eight takes a lot more from the 80s thing. We'll get to that, I guess, in a little bit. But that little funny bit with close the door. Close the door. It was just like, it's so subtle, yet Tarantino took it. He put his own Tarantino spin on it, and I love it.
Goddamn blizzard out there. Close the door.
So the original is set in Alaska, and it was actually shot in Glacier National Park, as well as in an ice storage plant in LA for some of the interior shots.
I will say the setting in the original movie was great. I mean, the movie definitely felt all of the characters, and Lord knows there's a lot of characters, maybe way too many, but it felt very isolated. And I think it worked to the advantage of the story. All of you have this frigid environment, you have people that are seemingly trapped. And again, this movie's just like 1951. So you feel like they're even a little bit further back in terms of technology and maybe being able to communicate with the outside world for help. So that definitely helped, I think, the setting.
I hate being cold, and then just seeing the people be cold and the jackets and the snow, and then their only safe space was inside with a bunch of other people. Yeah, it just felt very claustrophobic and uneasy. And I just wanted to escape, but there was no way in my mind that it was safer out there than inside. So
Watch the skies everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the skies.
All right, so let's go ahead then and move on to the remake. So here is another synopsis and a little bit of background for you. In The Thing, a team of researchers in Antarctica encounter a shape-shifting alien organism that assimilates and imitates any life form it touches, leading to paranoia and distrust among the group as they struggle to determine who is human and who is not. As the creature spreads its influence, the team must fight for their lives and the fate of humanity itself. Producers David Foster and Lawrence Terman went to Universal Studios with the idea to create a more faithful adaptation of Campbell's novella. Universal, in turn, bought the rights from Wilbur Stark in 1976, who held the rights to 23 RKO films in exchange for executive producing credit and a payout when the film was completed. That same year, John Carpenter was approached for the role of director, but he wasn't interested at first. Tobe Hooper was next in line, but the producers didn't like where he and Kim Hinkle were going with the story. John Landis was also considered, but after the success of Halloween, John Carpenter was approached once again, who was finally sold on the script after reading one of the key scenes written by writer Bill Lancaster, the blood test scene. The film stars Kurt Russell, Keith David, Wilfred Brimley, T.K. Carter, Donald Moffat, Peter Maloney, Joel Polis, Richard Dysart, David Clennon, and Richard Masauer. So, Anthony, tell me your feelings about John Carpenter's The Thing.
So, yeah, with this movie, it's just like, it's all gushing from me. Like any nitpicks of this movie, they're just going to be so small. It feels, it's a masterpiece. I don't know how else to say it. I know that word is thrown around a lot. I'm going to throw it around.
You feel it. It's okay. It's in your
It
heart.
is what it is. And so again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's rough that Carpenter, like that this movie, when it was released initially, critics bashed it. It unfortunately didn't do very well, and I'm just so glad that it was discovered and now it gets all of the love that it should have gotten many years ago.
So just love the hell out of this movie. It is a good time. I watched it for the first time as an adult a couple of years ago, and I wish I had seen it much sooner, but it still was a good time for me. And like the first film, it also does an amazing job building tension, but does it in a completely different way. I really love how the camera just sits on certain frames. It'll sit on a face or a landscape or whatever it's just sitting on and just hang out there and have you thinking about what the hell is going on, what's coming next. The music is just incredible and just so much fun to listen to. I was actually listening to it while listening to the soundtrack while doing research for our chat today. It's just I love it. Definitely in my mind, along with The Blob that I talked about last month, is one of the top 5 greatest remakes. And I have fun with it every single time.
I've seen people say this is like, their favorite horror sci-fi movie of all time. I've seen people say it's in their top 5. I've even seen people say, like, forget about like favorite horror or favorite sci-fi. It's just their favorite movie of all time. So yeah. I mean, again, the recognition that it's getting is crazy, and it's well deserved.
I feel bad for John Carpenter because when it came out, everybody was hating on it and talking all kinds of mad shit. So much so that he was fired from directing Firestarter, and he felt really bad about what he put out there. But he was just ahead of the game, and I'm glad that he got the credit later in life. It's funny hearing him say how he wishes he could be in a room one-on-one with the critics who bashed his work and say, yeah, what do you have to say now? But hey, it was at a weird time. We had E.T. coming out and they were in the middle of a recession and people weren't trying to be sad. They were against other sci-fi films because there were so many that came out that year, and his was just the most out there. He was just ahead of his time.
I mean, I guess it is such a stark contrast between this and E.T. or this and some of maybe the family-friendly movies from the era. You have like E.T. and it's just this beautiful, nice story that makes all the kids cry. And then you have this nihilistic, gory horror film that ends on this very dark, grim note. So I get it. It still pisses me off that it was so, hated on unjustly.
Yeah.
But
yes.
Hey, whatever.
So getting into the effects a little bit more, it's crazy that the lead effects guy was some 22-year-old Rob Bottin, who was the head of all of that. You had a huge ass crew of about 35 people, and you had to hire another person to help manage those people. But pretty much everything you see is from his brain, and he was creating it with his 2 hands, and even had to be hospitalized because of exhaustion and double pneumonia and all this stuff. He talks about how he wanted to do this kind of work since he was 7 years old. So he had been doing this stuff for a long time already, but still just at that young age and working on a set for a year and taking no days off and sometimes sleeping on set, more power to him. That's just awesome.
Yeah, no, he had an absolutely amazing work ethic, and it was completely, as we all know, it was completely worth it. I mean, in my view, this is like some of the finest practical effects that's ever been seen on the big screen, and it still holds up. We're in 2024 for those watching whatever year you're watching this. We're in 2024 now, and damn it, this movie still holds up. And if you're watching this in 2034 or 44 or 54, I'm going to say the thing is still holding up. I don't want to hear otherwise. Sure, people. But yeah, getting back to what you were saying, I absolutely love the effects in this. I mean, the creature doesn't stop, right? It just keeps changing. That's part of the allure. That's part of the charm of that. Charm. I don't know if that word fits here, but that's part of what makes this movie so awesome. Is that every time this thing is on screen, it looks different, and it looks different in a gross, awful, sickly, disgusting, vile way. But yeah, we love it, or at least I do. And it just all works. I mean, we have heads with spider legs coming out. We have of course the famous stomach scene where the hands go into the stomach and then that pops out and there's all kinds of madness. Stomach
Yes.
chomp. Video game. And that's really what happens with this movie is that, like, despite how serious it is and despite all of the themes and despite the fact that there's so much going on that that resonates and that you can talk about, it's still, at least to me, it's just a fun movie to watch. Maybe I'm sick. I don't know. It's just a fun movie to watch anyway. This is my idea of fun.
I was definitely happy to see that we get the thing way sooner in the remake than we do in the original. And we get to see it a lot more, especially because, yes, they're putting in all that work to create these creatures. So, but again, it's not too much though. We don't get the creature too much on screen. I feel like we get just enough. We're not left wanting more, and it's not just constantly on the screen either.
Yeah, it's like the perfect amount, isn't it? Like that we get of the creature. Like I don't watch it and I'm like, we could have seen even more. It's like, no. And we get so many different types. We even get some stop motion here and there. So there's just so much of it. And I do think, just to compare a bit, like if you've seen this movie first and then you see that and you see the original version and you're expecting a lot of creature and monster action, then you are sort of setting yourself up for disappointment because you don't even, like, I know that you're not going to get these wonderful practical effects necessarily from a 50s movie, and that's not to crap on 50s movie effects, like early movie effects, but I think we maybe at least would have been expecting more of the creature. But here we get just the right amount.
We already see at the very start McCready and his destructive behavior when he's playing chess and he destroys it when he loses. Like, come on, that is such immature behavior, but we get that same vibe toward the end, but for a greater cause, which is to save the rest of the world from this creature, where he's like, screw it, we're going to blow everything up, including ourselves, to make sure this thing doesn't escape. So yeah, he was a great leader in that sense too. While he was a bit hot-headed, he was still the most level-headed of the group to get them to the end.
And I feel like if you don't know Kurt Russell, you don't know, like, I mean, he's like a legendary actor, but if you just go into the movie and maybe you're not too familiar with him, then his character, what's interesting is he kind of comes into this leadership role as the story progresses. He's not necessarily, I feel like it can go any way when the movie starts, but he pretty quickly comes into like a leadership role, and I sort of like that development. You're right, and I actually love that he's rough around the edges, and he's not perfect, but that's what makes all of this work. I mean, all of these characters are flawed or have their little issues here and there, but I don't know, all of those dynamics and everything with these characters, all of these guys, they just feel pretty down to earth. They feel pretty grounded, despite the fact that there's a mix of like scientists and you have McCready, I believe is like the pilot. Right. Everything works. Everybody mostly gets along, but there's some clashes here and there. But even in that, I mean, that's pretty realistic. That's how it is at work. That's how it is in most any environment. You get a few people that get along, a few people that don't.
Speaking of clashes, it's funny that Keith David's character and Clark, the dog handler, decided off camera that their characters were going to be at odds just because they were both big people. It wasn't necessarily in the script, but with their processing of the script, they decided that, yeah, their two characters just wouldn't be friends.
I think I read that they had a few people in mind, right, for the role of that Keith David ultimately got. Yeah. Like I think Ernie Hudson was up for that part. So that would have been interesting. Ernie Hudson from Ghostbusters.
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
Speaking of other actors that were considered for Kurt Russell's role, McCready, Nick Nolte, Christopher Walken, Jeff Bridges, Tom Atkin, Jack Thompson, and Sam Shepard, who was actually never pursued. Sam Shepard was actually interested in the role, but nobody pursued him for the role. But John Carpenter decided to work with Kurt Russell because he had experience with him before, and he wasn't complaining about the cold weather. A lot of people were like, the shooting conditions, I don't know. But Kurt was on board and he didn't really care about it, and he was eager to work with him. And he also actually helped Carpenter with some of his ideas, and he was actually paid $400,000, and the rest of the cast was paid only $50,000.
I'm so glad they went with Kurt Russell. My goodness. I mean, all of those other actors do sound interesting, and they're like, you know, also a bunch of legends in that on that list right there that you just said. But man, this was just all Kurt Russell. I don't think this is another one of those movies with such an iconic performance. I don't think I could see another person in that role. Also, I want to give special Wilford Brimley. Had just a lot of great, maybe unintentionally funny moments in this movie. Where, I mean, there's a great bit where he's just losing his shit. He gets that axe and he's just swinging it all over the place. He's breaking apart the equipment. He's taking shots at everybody. And so, yeah, it's pretty fitting that they end up locking him in a room by himself. And I love that you get this great moment where he's locked in there and they go to visit him. And he's like, I'm all right now. You can let me out. Yeah, meanwhile, he thank you. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Meanwhile, he has the noose and it's like, you don't seem all right.
Something's wrong.
What's going on in there?
Come to find out, his ass was infected. Ugh.
He was infected, and I love that he's building all of these little parts, and he's putting together like his whole little makeshift ship down there underground, and that leads us into the whole conclusion. And I actually like the conclusion. I've heard some people say the conclusion felt a bit rushed, in terms of just criticisms. I don't know. Again, I'm just such a nerd for this movie. I love the conclusion. I thought it was a pretty big ending. We get this great shot of this huge creature, and all of that worked for me.
Yeah, I have very little criticism about the ending or the film in general. The only thing I could really maybe say is, there wasn't really much camaraderie between the folks. Like there wasn't like a buddy couple or a group of people. Everybody was just kind of on their own. But I think that might have been intentional to work toward the paranoia and the fear of, who's what, once we get into the movie. But yeah, other than that, like, again, I really can't think of anything else that I could say negative about the thing.
When this movie closes, it leaves us up in the air. And I feel like it's so fitting and appropriate that the entire movie is all about paranoia and mistrust. And now at the end, we have these two guys just kind of looking at each other. And it's like, are you infected? Are you infected? Let's just sit here and see what happens. It's a creepy moment. It's a haunting moment, but it's so fitting. It's the absolute perfect way to close out the movie, to leave us thinking and keep us guessing. Most likely these guys are just going to freeze to death. And I don't know. That's the point, right? It's like, who's infected? It doesn't matter. The idea is just, how do human beings deal with these types of clashes and these types of like insane levels of being mistrustful of each other, and how do they grapple with that and these struggles? That's like the deeper stuff that's going on with this film that also I think resonates.
Yep. They do set it up perfectly for the sequel to happen, because they could have frozen, and just to be a little bit out there, we could have defrosted them if they froze up, kind of like how we get with Alien to Aliens, where Ripley is defrosted, and we get that whole epic story that is almost just as good as the first, and some people say it's better than the first. I would love to see John Carpenter bring this one back and see what he would do with it for sure.
Yeah, I guess in terms of editing, I also want to I want to credit Carpenter here, and I want to credit the film, because we get a lot of fade to blacks, and I love that about this movie. In most cases, the movie fades to black, and you just get this idea of like a passage of time. Okay, but here, when the movie fades to black, you're like, oh God, who was just infected? What just happened off screen? Now, just to jump back to the previous movie, when things are happening off screen, there are big things happening, but here, like, it just feels so much more ominous and threatening, like what is happening off screen. The famous shot of the dog walking. This dog is an excellent actor too. It was
man.
When he walks and you just see the silhouette of one of the people from the outpost. We have no idea who it is. We're not supposed to have any idea of who it is. That's the point. And the dog just sort of creeps into the room. The guy turns around, fade to black. Beautiful. I love that moment. And it just sets up what's to come so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that dog was actually half wolf and they trained it for so long. Clark, the dog handler, was actually going to play a different role, but because he loves dogs, he wanted to play Clark instead to be able to work with the dogs. And them walking down the hallway together to have the dog go into the kennel was practiced for weeks and just done so perfectly.
And I'm glad you brought up the kennel too, because that just made me think. That's one of the earliest scenes in this movie when we start to get into the gore. The first time I saw the dog's head split open, it was like a jaw-dropping moment. No pun intended, because I think the dog's skull is actually in there and also drops. And on that note, if you're a fan of like body horror, there's a lot here to fulfill those body horror needs, I guess you would say. It's people have online, I've even seen people say that Tarantino's The Hateful Eight is like a secret remake of The Thing. I don't know that I necessarily go that far, but there's definitely a lot of homages in there. You have a bunch of people, confined to this small space that don't trust each other, and you have all of this tension in the air. It's a frigid, frozen environment. So you have all of these similarities. Obviously, there's not like an alien, but there is sort of just a lot of mistrust in the air, and just it's just a very ominous setting. But then also you have all of this Ennio Morricone music that was not used, sadly, in the original Thing movie, but it was used for Hateful Eight, and it just gives the Hateful Eight such a great vibe, gives the film such a great tone, and it's so fitting and perfect. Obviously for The Thing, Carpenter ended up going with Morricone's synthesized score, and that became sort of the main theme that we all know from the movie. But yeah, all of that unused stuff ended up finally being put to use for the Hateful Eight, and it worked so well. And we still got that close the door scene in there, which is a nice throwback to the original movie.
Come in. Close the door.
The goddamn blizzard out there. Close the door.
So I'm pretty sure I know the answer already, but if you had to choose, which would you pick?
Okay, so I'm going to go with the 80s version. Maybe not a big surprise. I just, and it's funny because the movie, like, there isn't even any nostalgia bias there. I saw that movie when I was a lot older, so it's not another one of those like, oh, I fell in love with it as a kid from the 80s or anything like that, or even from the 90s. It's like, nah, I saw that movie a lot later in life, like when I was in my 20s, which was only a few seconds ago. It wasn't that long ago. No, but I'm joking. So I would go with the 80s one. However, I also recommend the 50s one too. I think that's an interesting watch. It probably would be maybe a better watch for people that are fans of some of the older films and some of the older monster films from the 50s and 60s. I think that it might be a better watch for that crowd. And then we have like the 80s gore fest. I think that honestly, I think that fits for a lot of today's modern audiences. And maybe that's why it's so beloved now.
Yeah. Well, for me, unlike The Blob and The Haunting, this is the first time where I have like a decision to make that's a little tougher. Because with those previous two, I went right to my favorite pretty easily. But I did sit and think about it for a minute, but I will have to go with the 80s version. But, the 50s one is one that I will come back to time and time again. Like a lot of older horror film, it just becomes more psychological because we don't get to see a lot of effects. They're building the tension in our brain with the backstory and the science of things. And that's what keeps it interesting. But we do get that with the remake in addition to all of the special effects. So it's really hard to choose the 50s version over that because it just gave us everything and it was just so well put together and it was more true to the source material, which I also appreciated, and the cast was amazing, and it's just one of the greatest remakes of all time, period.
The 80s was interesting, right? Because we got The Blob, we got The Fly, and then we got The Thing. So you get these three older movies getting a remake treatment, and all three of them were knocked out of the park. So it's like this whole trilogy of horror films from the 80s. There may even be something else that I'm forgetting, but I know that those are the three main ones.
Those three are in my top 5, and to go along with those would be The Hills Have Eyes and The Crazies as the best remakes. Love them. Great movies.
And these are the ones that people tend to use as examples whenever somebody, will say like, remakes, and that, remakes have a bit of a bad rep. And then we bring up these other remakes, and it's like, okay, no, it's possible. It is possible to get a good remake.
It is. Yep. Well, Anthony, as always, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. I appreciate your time, and I can't wait for us to do this again.
Yes, I cannot wait either. It has been a blast. If you want to talk about The Thing again, I'm here for you. I have no problem talking about this movie endlessly. So yeah,
Hell
but
yeah.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome. Thank you very much.
Yes, wonderful. Well, until next time, Stardust. Peace.